Imposter syndrome is a concept that we hear very often. It is something that a lot of people have dealt with and a lot of people are still currently dealing with. I, for one, have been in situations where I felt othered, I felt out of place, and I've had that deep anxious feeling of being an imposter. But over time, I have set up systems that has helped me to ameliorate this feeling of being an imposter whenever it crops up. And these systems have been through clear questions that I have asked myself. These questions has helped me to comfortably see it and interrogate this feeling so that I can see it for what it is and strike it down before it takes root within me. So in this video, I share with you my systems of interrogating the feeling of being an imposter. So if you're currently experiencing this feeling or you're just curious to know what my systems are, then keep watching. The first thing I'd like to do is to break down the concept of imposter syndrome and where it's originated from. In an article published in 1993, imposter syndrome was defined as a psychological occurrence where people doubt their skills, their talents, and their accomplishments. And then they have an internalized fear that is persistent of being exposed to be frauds. And the genesis of this concept can be traced back to an article that was published in 1978 titled The Impostor Phenomenon in High Achieving Women. The author of this article surveyed over 100 women, and these women have been notably recognized by their colleagues for their professional excellence. Despite the consistent recognition that these women had gotten from their colleagues, they still doubted their skills and they lacked internal acknowledgement of their accomplishments. When they were asked about their success, some of them attributed it to luck, while some of them said that people have just overestimated their abilities. And this feeling feels so close to home, especially because I've been in situations where people would genuinely gas me up about my accomplishments. And I'll just say, it's not that big of a deal, when objectively it's a deal that I should be proud of. And I assume that you've probably also been in a similar situation like this at some point too. What is not surprising, however, is seeing that the earliest research on imposter syndrome was conducted on women, because over and over again, studies have shown that women experience the feeling of imposter syndrome than their male counterparts. And objectively, this is not surprising because when we look at the society, girls are societally conditioned to aspire for perfectionism than boys. In 2014, a study conducted by Hewlett-Packard, HP, titled The Leadership Aspiration Gap. The study showed that women in HP would only apply for promotions when they meet 100% of the qualifications, whilst their male counterpart would apply if they meet just 60%. I have also found that in countries with diverse races, like in the United States and the United Kingdom, people in minority groups experience this feeling a lot more than those in the majority group. Now, this doesn't mean that men do not experience imposter syndrome. Neither am I saying that people from majority ethnic or racial groups are shielded from this feeling of being an imposter. But it is important that I share this research so that we can have a clear evidence-based perspective on how this syndrome affects people, both on a macro and a micro level. Now, how do we address this feeling, and what are the questions I have built out to help me interrogate this feeling whenever it shows up? Before I go into the prompts, I think it's important to be aware that in many cases, imposter syndrome is not a stand-alone experience. It's oftentimes a manifestation of an underlying dynamics. So whenever you experience this feeling, instead of asking the question of, oh, I feel imposter syndrome, how do I treat it? I think the best question to ask yourself is, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome. Where is this stemming from? Prompt 1, am I a fraud? Let's face it, a lot of you are frauds. A lot of you are frauds and should be thrown into the nearest available jail. I'm kidding, okay? I'm kidding. You're not a fraud, okay? You're not a fraud. But when I say you should ask yourself if you're a fraud, what I am saying is you should take a reflective posture and genuinely ask yourself if you lack the specific skill that is required for you to thrive in the space that you're in. Now, this requires you to be honest with yourself. If your answer to am I a fraud is yes, the next question to ask yourself is, can you do something about it? Is this a skill that I can develop if I put in the effort? If this is a skill that you can develop, then start learning that skill. Because when you're able to build your competence in that specific area, it shrinks any feeling of being an imposter. A personal example that I have was when I got my role at Bank of America. I was working in finance, and in university, I studied law. Law and finance are two completely different things. And one of the tools that I needed to perform on my daily activities was Microsoft Excel. And this was a tool that I never did anything with in the university. And so I started to feel out of place and I had that deep feeling of being an imposter. But when I interrogated the feeling, I realized that it was stemming from the fact that I lacked that skill. And so I decided to learn it. I took crash courses. I reached out to people who I felt were great at Microsoft Excel. And I practiced and practiced and practiced like my life depended on it. Now, did my skill in Microsoft Excel improve? Yes, it did. And did that learning shrink my feeling of being an imposter? Yes, it did. If your answer to am I a fraud is yes, but you answered no to can you do something about it? So, no, this is not a skill that I'm willing to develop because it is the most critical skill that is required to thrive in this space. And it very much sits at my area of weakness. And I know that anything can be learned, but learning this will exhaust me and it's not something that I just want to get into. If this is your answer, then it's high time you start reassessing your stay in that space. Start thinking about your exit plan and pivot into an area that leverages more of your area of strength so that you're able to thrive in that environment. If, however, you remain in that space and you're not building that skill, the chances that you will continue to feel like an imposter is very high. And not only will you experience that feeling will cascade down into your performance, and this can have an insidious impact on your career in the long run. So ask yourself, am I a fraud? Prompt 2, am I feeling this way because I am in unfamiliar terrains? As you grow and you progress and you advance, there are times where you find yourself in unfamiliar terrains that pushes you outside of your comfort zone. And this has the tendency to make you feel like an imposter. This could happen, for instance, if you have just left your country of birth and moved across the world to now reside in another country. And this was an experience that I had when I first moved to the United Kingdom. At the time, I had never left Nigeria before, and so a lot of things were new to me. And I remember being in a team meeting and I said University of Warwick. So I pronounced it as Warwick, but the Brits call it Warwick. And there was this colleague of mine who was like, oh no, Bukola, it's not pronounced Warwick, it's pronounced Warwick. And I remember just feeling this slight bit of embarrassment. But after I interrogated that feeling, I was like, if I ask you to pronounce Ibadan or Lagos, you probably will butcher it. So no, I'm not dumb. Neither am I an imposter. I was just experiencing something that I had no earlier context of. So if you're currently in this situation, I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is to give yourself grace. Allow yourself the grace to make mistakes and to get things wrong. It's part of the process. It doesn't make you an imposter. Prompt 3, am I feeling this way because I am the only one like me in the room? If you're the obvious only in the room, there's a tendency to feel out of place and to struggle with the feeling like you don't belong in that room. And this can give rise to the feeling of being an imposter. And I find these situations to be very tricky. And it has even become culturally correct to not talk about them. But whenever I am in these situations, I like to ask myself two straight questions. The first question is, am I feeling this way because of an internalized feeling that is then manifesting as imposter syndrome? And in these cases, this feeling is usually unprovoked. So nobody has made me feel out of place. And objectively, my perspectives are respected and are accorded the same level of regard as my peers. In this case, there's several things that you can do, but I will touch on these things after I have addressed the second question. The second question is, am I feeling this way because I am experiencing an imposter treatment? So in this case, the feeling is provoked. You're clearly being made to feel different. And if you're experiencing imposter treatment, then the thing that I can say is that you reassess your long-term benefit or remaining in that environment, because clearly it's not a place that you can thrive in. And no matter how much effort you put in, you would always be made to feel like an imposter. Now, back to when the feeling is unprovoked. One way that I think you can break out of this feeling is to surround yourself with materials that reinforces to you that success has no gender or color or race or accent. And whilst this may sound pedestrian, having a visual representation truly shapes your perspective. Another thing that I love to do, and which I think sounds very counterintuitive, is to spend more time with people from the majority group. And in my case, it means spending more time with men or spending more time with people from majority racial groups. And what this does is that it shrinks in size any overestimation of competence I may have felt that they had. And in many cases, you'll find that they're not better than you. I remember listening to an interview where Michelle Obama was very open about her feeling of being an imposter. And she said something that I find very helpful to anyone who is in a position where they are the only one in the room and they are feeling different. And she said that I have been at every powerful table that you can think of. I have been at non-profits, I have sat in foundations, I have worked at corporations, I have sat on corporate boards, I have attended G summits, I have sat in on the UN. And the secret here is that a lot of the people that are in those rooms are not that smart. In more extreme cases, if this feeling still persists, then I think it's important that you seek professional help. Reach out to someone that can help you break down that feeling that you're experiencing so that you can trace it to the root cause and address it holistically. Prompt 4. Am I feeling this way because I think that the only way to success is through hard and laborious work? For many people who have had to surmount a lot of difficulties before they achieve a speck of success, I can understand how uncomfortable it may feel when you achieve something almost too easily. But guess what? You don't need to break an arm and a leg before you feel deserving of your achievements. If you've gotten it, you have gotten it. And that's why it's important that you assess your relationship with success. It doesn't always have to be associated with some element of struggle or suffering. Whatever you have attained was meant for you. Stop trying to poke holes into them. So there you have it. I have broken down the concept of imposter syndrome into granular pieces. If you've never heard of it, you probably now know almost everything you need to know about imposter syndrome. And like I said earlier, this feeling of being an imposter is usually a manifestation of something that is lying underneath. So use this prompt that I have provided to reflect on your own feeling, and they should help you in drilling down to your root cause. Let me know what you've learned from me today. And as always, like this video before you leave and subscribe if you've not, okay? Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch you on my next one. Bye.